Hello and welcome to another modelling video. This is Alan from the MoConnerMan at YouTube with another model video on honing your airbrush skills. Today I want to do a bit more of a focus on a style and method than maintenance and other things besides a quick cleanup, and talk about the popularised anime cell shading method that we're seeing on Gundams and other things for quite a while. I've been wanting to attempt it for a while. It is not particularly difficult, but there is many ways to do it, including utilising hand painting and Gundam markers to a mass amount of masking or freehand airbrushing. To get the more classic styles, my preference would be to paint darker colours, mask, or a lighter colour and mask where you have the glints and the lighter points and the darker points, and build up the layers of paints and even put the little glints by hand. So it's about 3-4. You have to choose out your colours, choose out where the light is hitting it, but it's only going to look good from one or two directions, and if you walk around the model such as a model show from other directions, it will look a bit weird. So it's more of a photography model that you post on social media than you display in real life. And again, when you're doing new experimentations, styles or whatnot, something like a Petite Bear Guy or a Haro Pla from the Gunpla Bandai range is ideal due to how basic they are. I've been wanting to do a Haro Pla for quite a while, but it's just not exciting enough, and seeing a few displayed in Japan, it's about showing who you are as a modeler or artisan rather than the details and the complexity of the kit. So I'm going to have an attempt at my own style on this Haro Pla. And maybe something like a Gashapon Zaku head, I'll do the more traditional masking style with a hard edge. I'm also doing a 3D printed Goblin Slayer helmet, and we'll do more of a masking, a gradient shading, a lot like the artwork depicted in this image here. LED on the inside. Everything will be done with lacquers. Laying down some primer, just some liquid surface by Tamir, half with lacquer thinner via 0.5mm OPHIR airbrush. Doing a 3D printed BT42 at the same time. The Haro Pla is all mounted on skewers. Mounting is a very important element. You spend quite a bit of time, especially big kit. You could be there for hours looking for the right parts, clipping it on, separating them in colours and all that, but due to how monotonous and tedious it is, it's not talked about or displayed enough in work in progress pictures, besides seeing these corrugated cardboard pieces or foam and alligator clip. I buy these clips online. Some hobby outlets sell them. They're labelled as card holders on a bit of wire with the alligator clip. You can also buy alligator clips and put them on bamboo skewers yourself. You can buy them mounted like that, but due to how they break down, it's probably not worth it. I've got two small sections as I don't have a lot available due to a ton of other projects being painted. All the yellow ones are separated. Only these would need to be masked for two sets of colours. This will be mostly free-handed for this project, but I'll do some hand painting and masking for the claws. And with this, there's not a lot going on with the red. There'll be two tones, and the brown is going to be multiple tones. And again, I think I'm actually going to do some hand painting to get the streaks and buff them and sand them to make them look flat and a single colour. The finish will probably be satin, and for the blue eyes I might find a really nice pearl or glittery light blue nail polish. That was the intention, but I think I need to talk about clipping it, and you'll probably learn that if you put it on something that's sort of like a cone or spreading out and you alligator clip it, it's going to pinch, shoot the part a million miles away, and it's going to land somewhere across your work site and lost forever. Something flat like this, it's not going to be too visual, and I could just put a dab of dark colour in that crevice. Most of this part will be seen, but I clapped it clipped it there. Something like this, the inside is definitely going to be hidden, so you can just clip it anywhere that is really visible. This is a point of articulation. The more that you paint and assemble, and making sure that you paint in a way that it can still clip together. There's a lot of preparations. I think it's the faceplate that I do, where the actual pegs are reamed out with a blade or a reaming tool to make it bigger than it actually is, so the paint will clog it up a bit and it will go back to a nice snap fit. If it's still a bit loose, I put a bit of PVA or wood glue to hold it together when all assembled. And sometimes where there's poly caps, just a little bit of tape or blue tack to make sure paint doesn't get on and it doesn't clog up. I probably won't bother too much and just run a quick wipe of sandpaper where it's painted and lifted off before plugging everything together. These parts have a reverse bit that's not seen, or a connecting bit, so mounting them were very, very easy. Now, you want to make sure that you have a particle respirator. The M4 brand is really good. Sorry, a gas particle or a vapor mask, not a particle mask. A dust particle mask only stops particles about 0.3 mil in size. That's the size of your airbrush, so everything leaving that pigment and vapor of thinner wires is going to escape and get into your lungs. You want it nice and tight, strap it on, and it has to be difficult to breathe. If it's difficult to breathe, it's good. Once it gets too hard to breathe, it's time to change the filter, and for the gentleman with the beard, extra tight, because that's where things can leak. So make sure you wear that while working. Don't have pets or other people exposed, you know, in the shed, outside, wherever. I've got an enclosed space that's actually annexed from the house, so it is suitable, can paint all year round. You might need to modify your workspace, but your health should come first. Now what's going on here is spraying this helmet. Now I've done some sanding and I'm putting down an initial layer to find any imperfections, which there's a few nub marks. There's a couple of visible X-axis lines. I'm going to probably touch it up with a bit of putty, re-sand it and re-prime it. So this is not the painting stage yet for the Goblin Slayer helmet, but looking for all these strange lines and issues, which there's still quite a few. SLA printing is amazing, but there's still going to be some evidence of it if you're going to have a super neat effect. If it's matte, it doesn't matter. If it's gloss, it's definitely going to matter. But I'm just going to spray it once a primer, touch up areas, sand, spray again, and whatever goes, goes. It is looking very good. The base was a fail print, so I just reamed some putty in there and sanded it off. And there's going to be some imperfections, and again it's going to be the same thing. Putty it up after the primer, sand it back, spray it again, and if it's good, it's ready for more spraying. We talk a lot about primer on the channel, and a lot of you have heard this a lot from me multiple times. So some primers have micro filler, and you'll notice with the Mr. Hobby ones, I'll say 1,000, 3,000, 5,000, 800. That's sort of the grit. The particles come out like sandpaper when you're sanding. It's very similar numbers. And what I do is about equal half. A lot of the micro filler that sits in this paint is a larger particle, sometimes than 0.3 mil. And it's going to sink at the bottom of your airbrush like a putty, and nothing is going to part. So with your primer, you have to externally mix with lacquer thinner primer, stir it until it's a nice slurry, slosh it in your container. If the paint sticks and slightly slides down, it's good. If it completely slides down with no sticking, it obviously needs more primer and it has too much thinner. If it sticks on like putty or mud on the side of the walls, it's no good. If you have a look, it's starting to get a bit transparent due to the sloshing. this is a good consistency. We don't talk about consistency of milk or anything. It's how it sticks to the side. The container is very dirty, but you'll see this same method in more of my tutorials. I'm going to fill up my little airbrush. It's definitely a bit too much. One more mix, jet bubble. And she is ready to spray on like so. Get it nice, wet, thick go. It actually might fill some of those Z lines, and I put it down and let that surface dry because I don't want to put an alligator clip and ruin it. So everything on the outside is visible. There's nothing inside. If this was a resin kit, a garage kit, or I planned this better, I would have actually had a little clip inside to clip it, pinch a bit of putty, or drill 2 holes to put the alligator clip through. And it's the same with this. We're just going to spray a small section, let that sit for a little while to dry, and then pick it up and paint another section. It's a nice slow process, and you just have a few projects going at the same time. Interestingly enough, in my tutorial and review demonstrating the God Hand sanding sponge, the same part and kit appears. This part had a flash mark where 2 parts of the mould, little plastic seeps through, and there's an ugly mark here. And one thing about cheaper kits is there are going to be imperfections, and if you're going to do a very fancy paint job, small things like that, nubs, seams, are going to ruin it, and you do need to take a bit of time in removing it, in the part being less like a plastic toy and more than a scale representation of what it is. And even though I profess that I'm going to have an anime tone on it, I'm still going to take it quite as seriously as if I was going to do a competition scale mold to look like a real tank, plane, person, whatever. And interestingly enough, this reminded me, as I started spraying, I saw a slight trace evidence of that mark in the first layer of the primer. And how this works is a microfiller, as once I started making a bit wetter and I applied a few coats, it flooded in, and that upbeam micron leftover line was not so visible anymore. And that's where the filling properties of this primer is working really well. And if I want to make sure that it's going to be a higher metallic finish or something, I may sand this area a second times and spray it again. If I was to do a very quick model, I may ignore it, paint, and go for a competition or a magazine picture or a social media link, take a photo and put the model aside for no one to see in person. But if you were to do something that was up to high scrutiny, like the Gunpla Builders World Cup, IPMS, that sort of thing, people see in person, or particularly a commission, these are the things you need to pay closer attention to make a more polished and high-end model. And it's just taking a close look, and as the primer is drying, it's being a bit more visible. So I'm definitely going to have to spray it a second time, sand it, and polish it out. It's a thing that you have to do to get that nice touch. Compared to people who do quick recolors or a high volume of work reviews, I'm a much slower modeler for addressing these small things, but they may not necessarily be mentioned in every video besides the very long Let's Build series, and again revisiting them in the Honing Your Airbrush videos series. Another beautiful thing about priming and the initial coat and looking for imperfections is, another thing you'll see is these circles. That's the ejector pin to separate the mold and the part from the mold. This is normally seen on the runners and not the actual parts. Older model kits would have this on the surface and not care. You would also see them on the underside of some kits. Now there's no evidence on the areas that's going to be visible with this model. We don't have to address it. Other times you'll put a little bit of putty in it and sand it up. These parts or ejector pin marks will only be visible once this grey primer is thrown on, so it's a good inspection period to fix up things to, again, make this less toy-like. A quick note about thinning. With the ratio 50-50, it's good as we still got a microfilling property, but the more thinner you apply and the thinner it is, the less microfilling property it's going to have and the less effective it will be. The thinner will evaporate, the paint will shrink and hug around the surface, and you're more likely to see those imperfections or find the scratches are not going to be covered as well. This can be done by multiple layers, but multiple layers without flooding apart and appropriate thinning is going to get the best result. And for more flexibility, that's why I always recommend the 0.5mm rather than the 0.3. Clogging's not going to happen, you're not going to have that. Finally, sanded up those nasty flash marks and we'll finish priming. We gave everything a second round of primer, 0.5mm airbrush mixed with a lacquer thinner after sanding, buffing and polishing. The finish is far more smoother. There may be one or two tiny bits of debris that was spat on and clumped on as a bump. This is just going to be polished later without even removing a layer of paint. And going back to this, the main reason we had to do everything, shifting it around and seeing how glossy it is from an under polishing, there is not a single imperfection or flash line around the putty, and the second round of sanding has sufficiently sorted that into one smooth piece. In the last video I was asked what I'm thinning my lacquers and Tamiya grey primer with. The answer is always premium acrylic thinner, also known as automotive lacquer thinner. They come in 3 grades: standard, multi-purpose and premium. Standard is the fastest drying, excellent to use for metallics, primer. General purpose is formulated for base coating, can do glosses and matte coats. Premium is exclusively for clear glosses. How they're formulated is how much retardant is added, and your premium is generally exactly the same as Mr. Hobby leveling thinner. I like to use leveling thinner with everything, and I just choose to use this for everything. It works quite well. You just have to be a little careful with your mattes and your metallics. If you're using polyurethane, acrylic water-based, acrylic alcohol-based and enamels, there are versions you can buy to mix in your hobby grade stuff that also passes through an airbrush. Polyurethane, it's best to use their home brand thinner. Ideally, to clean it, instead of using their cleaners, you can just use window cleaner, Windex sprayed in there or mixed with water. For enamels, white spirits is a very quick drying thinner. Gum turpentine or turpentine is a lot oilier and it is slower drying. Also excellent for cleaning out your airbrush. Hardware stores and art stores will sell them. Art stores will sell a wider variety of mediums and blends and whatnot. Hardware stores obviously are far cheaper. And for your acrylics, alcohol based, you can just use isopropyl alcohol, which is very quick to dry, and maybe a methylated spirits for cleaning. Also used for mixing if you don't have a choice, like in Australia. Isopropyl is hard and expensive to come across in a very high quantity. Digging through our paint, we have had a good look at the reference material. The colours compared via this footage will not be ideal, so I will patch in the same picture via the edit. We'll shade these multiple colours, one on top of the other, very close to the anime more than the real subject, and get some modular shading going as per the previous video. As we don't have a modulation set, you can choose out colours and get inspiration, and the larger your collection of greys and blues and whites and whatnot enhances via buying military grade colours or buying a colour and mixing something with grey and something else with white or a darkish colour. you can make your own pre-mixed version of modulation or just buy it straight off the rack, and I think these three will work out quite well. My usual method is I do a quick clean out of the airbrush in case there's any dust or gunk from left over. Each of my paints has a stainless steel ball bearing, proper stainless steel, not something cheaper. They'll rust and contaminate the paint, so that's very well. The needle nut is in place, so it's not going to go anywhere. And the beautiful thing is I've got this thinner dispenser, and you just squeeze it to let out a few drops. Give it a bit of a stir, finger at the end, bit of a mix, and always test spray. We don't have to colour this whole thing, but the idea of colour modulation is to dust it on, so we're going to handle it fairly soon again. And we're getting all the lower lights because this is the darkest colour. We're going underneath the wheels, and that's still very light for under there. We're going to hit that with liquid smoke or black, and the wheel wells. Now we can either let it dry, but I'm going to sit it down on this platform and only spray underneath the turret, any side detail, the front, under the cannon, sides of the cannon, so what, so forth. I'm not worried about being super neat or anything, as we're going to shade on top, and the more we're going to shade up, the neater we're going to be. There's a lot of chunky detail. I'm definitely going to colour that in, as it's going to have the shadow effect once we tightly spray it with a lighter colour. But that should get us for now. Now, I recycled the paint. You can put it in a separate container knowing it's pre-thinned, or add it to your existing one if you know ratios of colour by eye. I wipe out the cup of paint as much as I can and give it a bit of a clean up on the inside. Spray the rest out. Fill up a bit of thinner. Jet bubble. There's only a little bit, a few drops. Spray it out. I like to pull the needle out slightly so it just gets at any debris or gunk or whatever. Push it straight back in when you're done. Fill up, and you keep repeating until the thinner in there is absolutely clear. And I mentioned at the start that for about $30 I buy 4 litres of thinner. You can get an airbrush cleaner where a few drops will flush it out quite beautifully when it's all gunked up. With 4 litres of thinner, or even a litre or 4 litres of paint stripper if you wish to have another container, this will clean your airbrush out for the cheap. Aircraft grey, comparing with the light air blue, test spot of course. This time around we've got the majority of the base done, and it's all blue all the way around. You can see that it's a smaller paint circle. We're not as sloppy. We're keeping a little bit of the blue highlight at the bottom of the turret, and we're shading upwards. Again, the reason why we have an oxidized red under, as that is the colour a lot of tanks from the period was coloured or painted from rust or a rust primer, and it just puts a lot of armour modelers at ease when they're painting. That's going to have the right accurate glow. Where there's so many different tones of paints of different colours being applied, it doesn't matter too much. but if you have it, you have it. Now, on the top, we're picking out the detail of all the raised areas, and we're going to keep the lower areas still in that darker blue colour. It's going to give it a variation, tone, all that sort of thing. And just picking it up from the top and not the side, so there will be a variety of colours and things to look at by the eye. It's going to give it that point of definition. I can see that there's a little bit of a red halo outline around the top turret, so we've just tidied that up a bit on the side, and it's just small lines and cleaning it in. This is known as post shading, and we can go back. If we do a sloppy job, we can go back, pull the trigger and dust on more paint. But I've got this so neat, it looks okay as is. Focus on the front a bit and just get it right behind the lights, and we'll just colour in the wheel wells later, and that is a finished job. Also, in the event that the tiniest edge or corner does not get covered in paint when you're painting the whole thing as such, it comes across more as very subtle weathering rather than grey primer or black, white, anything like that. So there's always a little bit of thought given to your undercoat. The shading of this has come out pretty nice. The blend gradient, but I had a bit of an accident and sprayed and spluttered paint in the middle of the grey. This time it's a very, very thin line, and we're picking up detail on the top. So just tracing around the turret top, and we're just colouring in different bits of detail. So as we're looking at it, the different modulations of colour and the different shades from the different sides are jumping out to us, and it's creating an illusion of sorts of where colour's coming from. This works well for small scale stuff. As the larger scale we're going and it goes across multiple parts, it does get a bit more complicated, but the easiest to think is when you're painting very light colours, it's just straight down on top, and you shouldn't come across any major hardships. We're just going to look at the very bottom of the wheels, a little bit on the front there. Not a lot of paint's being used. I'm calling that done. Less is definitely more. Very happy. To prevent dry drip or clogging, pull the needle out once your airbrush is empty and in the appropriate position. With a slightly damp bit of tissue paper and thinner, we're going to wipe the needle clean. You can also polish it and rehone the tip with a bit of sandpaper and a knife carefully. And at the tip there will be a build up of paint. Left over the tissue paper we're going to screw up into a little triangle and swab that out. In between you can use a soaked Q-tip with thinner and swab out your nozzle once the needle is removed, as to not bend the needle. You could also just pull the trigger back and do that, but a little paint will seep out. In better light, let's have a look at what we've achieved, and it all blends in fairly nicely, but that's all the spraying, a little liquid black. The rest will have to be hand painted. Painting by hand stage completed. We'll chuck on some decals. The decal applied flatly, no softener required. All moisture has been dabbed off or dried. I'm going to chuck some EX clear flat. It's sort of like a semi-gloss to seal it all. I want to handle it fairly shortly after I've done this, so we're just going to dust it on. Nothing too thick. Same for the tracks. Sit there, get some other areas that are a bit hard to access underneath the wheel wells, and we're going to let that sit and rest for 1 or 2 minutes. Here's a major screw up and disadvantage of airbrushing. This little area has not been picked up. Again, due to an oxidized red undercoat, it just kind of looks like weathering or rusting. I wanted that perfect anime clean look as per Girls and Panzer. That's what I'm depicting with this tank. I just touched it up with some hand brush paint. Now what we're going to do is actually colour in where the decals are. So that is nicely glossed up. So it's going to actually encapsulate the decal in clear paint. Everything else is just going to have a light dust on of clear coat as a uniform thing. Clear coat's good that it's a resin with either a pigment to matte it or not. Its natural state is glossy. It's an extra film that goes over your paint and on the whole surface to seal it and protect it, makes it less vulnerable and volatile to chipping, scratching, wear, tear, tape lifting up and all that sort of thing. So clear paints have multiple properties, not just changing the finish. And in the case of the decals here, it's protecting it. It's not going to dry out, fall off, flake off. There's not enough adhesion on the glue of the decal to stay there by itself. It will scratch off, as decal on decal paper is fragile. If you have a decal you don't like, experiment with getting it wet, scratching it, and if it gets moisture on it again, it will flake off. Be careful when you're cleaning clear paint out of the cup. It's not visible. You don't know if it's all out or not from the jet bubble technique. I prefer to do some sort of pigment painting after a clear coat, so when I'm cleaning it I know it's thoroughly flushed out. You will know after doing one flush the next day the needle might be sticky or the trigger might stay still. It even catches up on us who are more experienced. Now, a hint I picked up from the elitist scale modelling critique group on Facebook. This was a fairly matte-ish, little bit of a satin finish, and this was a matte satin clear coat applied on the decal. There is a clear halo around, but it's absolutely invisible. This is due to the surface being smooth enough that the decal applied on it and abrasion did not scratch up the clear bits and created a frosted halo around. The clear coat, it properly sealed it. A lot of people say you must clear before decals and clear after. This is more of a suggestion to beginners to prevent silvering, but it's not 100% necessary for everybody. I was confident enough that it won't silver. If you're unsure, polish up the surface. Failing that, a clear coat does work on bottom and top if you have any doubt. I just chose not to because I was fairly confident and saving a few steps to finish this fairly quickly to turn over a video. Next, clear black. We went into greater details about this last upload. I like it for shadowing, I like it for canding, I like it for tone changing. We're just going to shadow the underneath and do some soot weathering build up. Check this out. It's a little darker further. It's almost black, but starting to fisheye, and now it's not so good. On the other side, and that's fairly perfect. That's all we want to do, or a lighter amount. That's a very subtle change. It's not 100% set, and I'm risking it quite a bit. Just that much for sure. And further around, we're going to darken the tip of the cannon underneath the turret, underneath the wheel wells, a little tickle under there, tickle there, tickle there, build up there, and one more spray on the bottom. And we're afforded a little more definition, a little more believability under the wheels, and it's just darker in general under the tail. And that's how badly that area fish-eyed, by the way. Last step for this session, I've applied a black wash to pick up the lower detail. I'm going to allow that to dry for a few days, being oil-based. Pick up the edges with a weathering pencil, a few layers of matte clear, maybe 1 or 2 wash such as a brown, and this tank will be considered finished. The helmet from Goblin Slayer is finished sanding and filling in holes. It's looking pretty good. We'll start the base coating process. We've painted this last session, but I just had to pick up the edges with a clear black, as well as underneath that area, and a touch of shading. All this needs is a wash, the edges picked up, and this piece is completely finished with some matte. Pretty happy how the chipping went last time. There's a few clears after all the paint sufficiently dried and cured, so it's not really going to scratch, and it's fused to multiple layers of paint, making the hairspray useless. Got metallic black on the inside of the helmets, the bottom, and some areas. We'll let this dry for a day or so we can hold it in those parts or mount them flat on this corrugated cardboard and spray the rest. Once in one colour, we're only going to be shading panel by panel and able to hide dry bits for long term. Now again with metallic black, we're going to base coat the Zaccarello Haro Pla. I really like metallic black as a base. It's good for building up metallics and chromes, as well as other very shiny surfaces. Spraying Mr. Color GX Metallic Black. Nice big container for your buck. We're going to be doing a wet coat. Too much, it's going to run. So we want to just get a base coat down. Just nice and light. This is all done with a 0.5 nozzle. It's kind of transparent, and you can see that glint from the lamp. It's nice and shiny, nice and glossy. I did a bit of polishing on the primer earlier, and you can see why this will do a lovely chrome effect. That's starting to gellify and go from a liquid state to a putty state, and then we can put another wet coat to build that intensity. This takes a bit of practice to get right. It's nice and speckly, and just check out that wet look. It's going to lose some of its luster once it dries. You can just easily by buffing it and putting a wet gloss coat, buff wet gloss coat polish, and it's going to be as shiny as if it's coated in a constant layer of water. And this is going to be our base coat, a little masking, a little layering of other colours. It's going to be interesting. But I do love the metallic black for all sorts of effects and the bases of metallic shading and normal shading. Yeah, don't touch it. Metallics do dry very slowly, and we have used a retardant. And you can just see how there's just no imperfections, no bumps. Came out quite nice. And just really enjoying looking at that sheen. Not that much extra work, but totally worth it. 15 minutes to half an hour. Almost dry to the touch. To be honest, not gain enough to. We'll allow it to harden over 24 hours. And you can see that it's frosted a bit. Doesn't have that wet look. It can still be achieved, again, through clear coats and buffing. But through moving around and looking at the glint, you can still see there's no cracking, no imperfections, no little lumps. I would not spray anything else on top of that, as it may ripple the surface or crack or do other things. Just going to let this dry. A day later, we have sprayed another side of the helmets, so we can pick it up and handle it without leaving any fingerprints. It's very troublesome and and irritating to do this, but we're not going to have any imperfections. We'll be chucking a matte flat on top of this. I've got EX flat clear and EX flat clear. This is the premium one. Due to how milky it is, I assume this is the dead flat, because EX4 gives me a bit of a satin finish. So we'll give this a test and see what finish is acquired on our tank. Always put a ball bearing in instead of stirring. Good shake for about 15-20 seconds. A half-half ratio of thinner and finish. Spraying a bit of metallic black here. The surface is pretty shiny. And we'll just dust on a few layers and see if that actually mats it up or not. It's a dry coat and 2 wet coats. Let's wait and see. I'm a bit impatient, so being very careful. A wet coat in the under the wheel wells, under there, and colour in paint tracks. Let it rest on its side. Now that is a flat, dead matte. It's probably one of my favourites now. That has just done really well. It's in a massive bottle. It's pretty affordable. Can't complain. Did the trick on the bottom too. I was polishing a part for about 5 minutes, and this is stone dry to the touch with a few wet coats. There's a good reason why Guy Notes is just one of my favourite colours, and it's not easy to traverse of the types and finishes and whatnot, but I think once I get a better understanding in every experiment I try, I just get happier and happier, and there's not much complaining about. It works quite well. There is a few complaints I got that 1 or 2 colours has transparency issues. They don't have as a thick pigment count, but we're going to have to test that theory out and either confirm or deny. It's raining, so I'm not going to do too much talking or filming during this session. The BT42 is finished. 2 matte coats, completely dead. Got some nice edging, some nice weathering, not a bad look. The helmet and the stand has its final coat of metallic black. I'm thinking I might polish it, clear coat it, and polish it again before moving on. Automotive grade clear coat applied. We polished the claws the second time, and we'll give it a bit of an experimental chrome paint job. Utilising various masking tapes, all thin, around 3mm to 0.7mm. I'm a big fan of the Aizu pinstripe masking tape. We've got all the black edges highlighted, opposed to using a Gundam marker or weathering pencil dry brushing. It's going to be very tight. However, it did take a very long time to get this far. The finished result will definitely be worth it. Start putting some lower colours underneath. The small brown bits I'm imagining is going to be hard masked. The larger yellow bits is going to be free-handed. All rigged up. Gunmetal for the jigsaw piece, and we'll use this range of browns for the brown parts. Got the colours all down. Allow that to dry for 24 to 48 hours before further masking. Spraying with masking tape, I've applied it as firmly as I can with my finger. Put the tape straight down on the surface after being dried. No further painting has been done prior for up to days, and I cut directly in the folds or pre-cut and lay it down. The part has been wiped clean to prevent any oils from the skin or whatnot. for maximum adhesion. Once all set, to prevent paint seeping or leaking under the tape or lifting off, I dust paint on as finely as possible so it's landing dry on the model, filling up any gaps where paint may go underneath, and then we put a wet coat on top, allow that to dry. Utilising the darker brown and only the arm, we're going to be doing a liquid mask. Choice of product, Hobbyco Master Mask. We're also filming a review for this while doing the Honing Your Airbrushes skills video. Applied this thickly with a brush to get the same shapes, and neatened up the edges with a toothpick and Q-tip or brush. Applied another round of mask on the jigsaw piece. We've already talked about the Zaccarello arms, and the thrusters. We've got various type of glints and shadowing of the light brown. Be colouring in each of these pieces. Got stainless steel and shiny steel or shiny silver. Shiny silver, I'm going to do a few fine lines with a different airbrush. We'll just colour it in with stainless steel for now. Nice and easy, just a top view, the third layer of silver, and it's just a thin coat like that. Just dust on a bit more, and that's it. Decided to pull this one out to do a couple of thin lines as a test. Not bad. Think that works. One go, freehanding, can't screw this up. Oh yeah, that turned out perfectly. Allow the pressure to build up a bit more. Perfect, I'm pretty happy about that. And a bit of a build up of a glint here. Spray it in. Pretty happy with that. In the way of choosing colours for the anime cell shading, I coloured this part in half just to show the tone that's stepping up and the lines that's going to be covered from the mask. Compared to the actual box art, the final brown will be quite dark. Here is the couple of flash lines and the glint, and these parts are all painted up. This is the finished jigsaw piece. Came out exactly how I wanted it. I'm not even going to clear coat it. You've got the fine edges and the glint lines and whatnot. Overnight the mask has dried. The final layer of masking tape for the thrusters. Applied the liquid mask. Looking good so far. With the thruster bits completely painted with the dark brown, we're going to get the red missile pod ends. The claws are going to be painted this K scale model chrome. Selection of parts have been painted. Last layer for the inner red bits. One more coat for the thruster bits. We've got a bit of liquid mask applied for the red parts, and the yellow parts are completely done, and you can see all the different textures for all the different layers of masking. We will have to hand paint the love hearts. From black to a yellow, a few coats will be required. I'm just about to pull a polyurethane through my airbrush, and this thing has been drinking lacquer like no one's business. The needle has been pulled back a bit so I can just siphon out liquids, and I put in just a few mil of brake fluid to break down all the paint and siphon out of the nozzle, eventually just blasting the last of it. And now I'm doing a mixture of water and window cleaner to make sure that the internals is only has trace amounts of what polyurethane paint's like. No thinner, no lacquer, no alcohol, no enamel. All I do is I put it in there, and it's just slowly dripping out of the end like such, siphoning through, and when it's really, really low, I spray it out. Occasionally put the needle back in and do the jet bubble technique, just to get into all those nook and crannies. Progress on the Zaccarello ball anime cell effect. We've tested these spoons with K airbrushing acrylic chrome. That's a polyurethane, and believe it or not, it's actually got a fair amount of resistance. It feels very good. It's still kind of curing. We've got the claws going, hand painting the base, and the rest of the bits and pieces we've been removing the masks. And where there's been one or two tiny issues of paint lifting or paint seeping in, I've used a fine brush and hand painted any imperfections, so none of that's even noticeable from the camera. These are the best bits that popped out. The arms, pretty proud of that. And the thruster didn't come out bad at all as well. That looks pretty funky. The main ball with the sides masked, and a little bit of the mouth bit with a thin mask. Applied 3 coats of yellow, and we shall freehand the shading instead of masking. Panel bits are done. Hand painted a little bit of detail on the claws, and this is the look we've got on the face. Bit of shadowing. It's a little softer, and you can see where it's light on the face. So it's a bit of a mix of hard edges and soft edges. Soft edges looking a lot bigger on a larger surface, obviously. Applied a black wash. Just going to wait for it to dry until tomorrow, and we'll have our final matte coat. We've got the ES Flat Clear EX10 by Gaia Notes loaded up in the airbrush. It comes out quite cloudy, not transparent whatsoever. Dries very transparent. Talked about it last time. We're just giving a final matte coat to make everything uniformed on the Haro Pla, and it's just simply giving everything a light coat like that. Bit of a wet sheen, allow it to dry for an hour or so. All of the parts laid out, ready for assembling. This part is pretty important to painting, even though it's post-it. I allow it to dry for a very long time. I don't touch the model for a week, sometimes even longer, once the last bit of weathering or paint is applied. And because the joint is so loose, I put a little PVA glue in where it connects, so it's permanently stuck together. PVA glue is amazing as it dries clear. If there's any mess with the finish, if it dulls gloss or makes matte look glossy, I could put more top coat on, but I'm going to have everything together tight, flush, no showing seams, no paint melting on the edges, no clear bits fogging up. More or less the placement of the glue coming together, no paint chips so far. The Haro ball is finished and assembled. Came out amazingly. I don't think I'll be doing hard edge and soft edge shading on the same model. It works with this guy, but I could see how it won't work with other things. Nonetheless, absolute bunch of fun. You'll learn more about him in the review video of the model. Now, going to the final end of the airbrush, wrapping up the water filter with tape just in case thinner runs down it or paint has worked a treat so far, and there's been no damage. I can lift the tape and I can see it's all clear and perfect. Just used electrical tape. It will extend the life of it. It just does not look anywhere near as attractive. And in the airbrush itself, the OPHIR, I haven't really been practicing much with it, and due to the fact of that, I've lost a bit of confidence, and unless I've got a bucket load of time, I'm not sitting down and just airbrushing randomly or all over the place. And realistically, unless you want to improve, you kind of need to pick it up at least monthly. Spray lines, spray junk, paint models, keep practicing to get that confidence up, so you're just happy to pick up and run with it without even thinking. There is so much to keep in mind in an airbrush that you can sort of get into a bit of a mental block and then furthermore lose inspiration. For a beginner, the more you handle it, the more you play with it, disassembling it, reassembling it, spraying lines, you will rapidly get good. Not just get good over a long period of time, but get good very, very quickly. And I absolutely guarantee and assure that. And as you're playing with it, it gives you a chance to familiarize with it and maintain it. I haven't done much with this for a while. It's not lubricated, it's not thoroughly cleaned inside, so I'm going to pull it apart and give her a bit of a clean. Now, I've been setting up some guys to airbrush for the first time, and there's really so much to for them to keep in their mind. Once they've got all the basics down, it's a bit like riding a bike, but for the first time it's a super daunting task, and they're focusing on different chemicals, different lines of paint, what would work together, what doesn't, what goes on top of each other. And in the end I set them up that this is your airbrush paint, your independent thinner, you set up, pour it in, have a play, thoroughly clean it, and as you go along and you hit roadblocks, you meet those challenges as they lay. If you have a really good hobby shop, generally they won't let you walk out with the wrong equipment, parts, thinners, paints, all that. So if you're asking, does this X28 thinner work with this paint, or can I layer these on top of each other? If they hesitate or can't give you a straight answer, it's probably time to look for a new hobby shop. But I suppose the cool thing with the internet now and the amount of handy guides and all of that sort of stuff, you can sort of collect all that wealth and watch a ton of videos and read a ton of tutorials, then get the confidence to have a go. But the problem with sitting on social media and YouTube for way too long is you're not getting the confidence up of actually doing the process yourself. Now, as a reminder, this airbrush has a seal or a O-ring around here. Once that O-ring dies, the airbrush is kaput until you replace it. Any air going in is just going to lower the siphoning effect. And generally, due to how good this airbrush is, I only open that seal on the very rare occasion to check for any imperfections. Clean the thread, clean around the joint, but not getting any thinner whatsoever on the O-ring. And as it's a 0.5 with a very large hole here, I'm not finding any gunk here. So the idea of this exercise was to open her up and check what's going on the inside. And even though I haven't actually cracked this open for about 6 months, and I haven't treated it too well, sometimes I've let paint inside of it, it's done quite well. And when flushing it out, pulling the needle out and spraying any debris through the nozzle has proven that I don't get that lint build-up as you do with the OPHIR airbrushes or anything that's rocking a 0.3 nozzle. Got the Vaseline out to lubricate it up. Definitely haven't done this for a long time. Due to the lack of build-up inside the airbrush and giving it a really good thorough scrub, I'm going to save this from the ultrasonic this time around, and the next time that I do it, I just might put some alcohol or something that just softens it but doesn't dissolve the O-ring, and only for a short period of time, as the experiment with the 0.5 is just going pretty well, and I've been having a lot less issues than when I've been submerging my airbrush almost on the monthly. I think I'll save spraying with a 0.3 and a 0.2 of rarer intervals in its own independent airbrush, and it could go probably many years until that needs a ultrasonic clean, thus preserving the integrity of the O-rings, which, trust me, replacing is pretty much a nightmare. Now, the coolest thing about lubricating, which we haven't talked about for a long time, besides clogging up the seals and making air less likely to escape, is putting this oil grease on the rubber O-rings and just moisturizing them again, allowing the threads not to bite and permanently weld together if paint seeps through, and making it just overall more smoother to operate. And at first it might be a bit jittery with the air coming out because it's slightly too clogged, but as it breaks down it'll get smoother and smoother. And I notice when the slightest amount of paint gets on the needle, it's sort of been sticking and giving me a bit trouble. I've been needing to pull the needle out more often to wipe down. So hopefully with this it's going to be better than even the day that I've purchased it. Being a little more seasoned, I don't exactly have the need of dismantling and rebuilding constantly, but if this is your first year of airbrushing or you've got a new airbrush, definitely monthly, weekly, bi-weekly, you need to pull it down all the way to popping off the nozzle and putting it back together. This top bit needs to have a very tight twist to it. Clean the crown cap later. For me, I've actually repaired so many people's airbrushes now and pull them apart as a form of customer service. It's almost second nature that the second someone gives me an airbrush, it's let's crack open the back. The worst part is getting this trigger on and making sure when it's in you've got some spring back, which it does. If it's bent and at the bottom it's just metal on metal and there's no spring whatsoever. Airbrushing in the end is actually pretty easy. I don't have a lot of trouble with it. I'm not the smartest guy. I don't have the best academic pursuits or artistic talent or mechanical abilities. But having the ability of just practicing and practicing and practicing and practicing and practicing, I can definitely play with all of this stuff with such confidence. It's not that much of a problem at all. And you can see that this is super smooth until it just flew off. That's going to be a pain to get back on. I'll show this assembly. The spring's inside and that's what gives this motion of smooth moving. And with the lubricant, that's also doing a lot better. You know this is high quality due to how long the thread is, where the cheaper ones don't necessarily. Now they're name brands, they're the Chinese stuff. This is a Chinese one, and I got into another conversation that is what's superior, what's the best airbrush. And realistically, an airbrush is a very personalized item. In the past it was considered very rude to handle or even look at an airbrush model as airbrush. Once the needle goes in, this is protected, it won't come out, so it won't flick out like I stupidly did before. It's a very personalised instrument and people get a feel for the sensitivity or how rigid it is or how easy or hard it is to use, and everyone has a different opinion. It's something that you don't necessarily have to respect someone's choice, but they may have better success with a certain brand and type and pattern of airbrush, where another people absolutely just can't get their hand or head around it. Thus a lot of shaming among the upper ends of the art and airbrushing community, where people gravitate around a certain personality and that's the airbrush that's worshipped. People get weirded out if you rubbish Iwata. Other people get weirded out if you like Chinese. Many people get weirded out if you hate H&S. And in the end, do your best. If you have ever an opportunity to test or try or use an airbrush without buying it, go for it. Because realistically, once you get more advanced in the hobby, you get curious and you wonder if something works better, something doesn't work better. Is the grass greener on the other side if you have the disposable income and cash to splash? And I've always wondered why businesses never had a whole line of airbrushes and you try them all for a fee, pick out the one that you absolutely must have. And that way you're not spending $1,000 on owning all the airbrushes and sticking to the one that you like, not being able to sell the rest at an affordable rate. All in all, if you don't have a lot of money and you properly tune up one of the cheaper ones, putting a 0.5, it's going to get as close as good as you're going to get. And there is subtle differences, but the differences are not massive or huge. It's more about ease of cleaning, the flow process, and all of that can be purely controlled through the maintenance and well-being of an airbrush. The best of the line airbrush, if incorrectly cared for, is going to perform very poorly. Let's flush it out and put some paint in it. If you didn't follow the assembly and disassembly of this airbrush well enough, that's not a big concern. If you look up the review for each airbrush I've ever got my hand on and demonstrated on this channel, that would be the video where it's done slow and to follow with. That would be the best way of learning the inner guts of how that rig works. Right now I'm just wiping off any excess grease, wipe out the inner part of the cup. There might be the slightest amount of residue of lubricant in the system, and we're just going to paint some lines of paint so we'll contaminate that paint and not something we're actually working on a project. And after a thorough clean, she'll be absolutely perfect. The idea of this activity is to paint lines as thin as a pencil for detailing and shading and getting corners and all that sort of thing. I'm using the easiest paint is to use, which is lacquer. It's just a rubbish brand that I picked up from the UK a very long time ago. I don't think it's suitable enough for modelling. And it's as simple as getting the air pressure up, tuning your airbrush to the best of its ability, and spray painting some lines, experimenting how close, how far, when the air turns on, where the air turns off, and studying the strokes. I'm going to have several attempts at it, and we will talk about it off camera, as it's always difficult to spray when I have something over my shoulder. I've done a few lines so far and feel I've got the practice up. Instead of doing pages and pages, it's 5 crappy ones until I got the idea. And I wait for the tank to be absolutely full of air. Get nice and close where the tip is touching close to the paper, and getting a fairly tight line with no splattering. Pretty happy with that. So that was very close. If we pull all the way back up, open the nozzle ever so slightly and then pull back as we're moving down, we get a bit of a shade or a transparent effect. It's all about experimenting the distance of your gun, how far you pull the trigger, instead of relying off the stopper at the back, which is more for training wheels, a beginner mechanism. And again, for the ultimate tip for the beginner, if you're ever unsure, tip the paint out, wipe the internals, keep flushing with thinner, pull apart to inspect the interior. And with a well lubricated and tight fit, only the tip has paint, the rest of the body doesn't. Don't forget good air compressor maintenance. Bleed out any water traps. If you have a filter at the end of the line, disconnect the hose to allow the internals to evaporate and dry out. Never store compressed air on the piston and turn on. I've got the Goblin Slayer helmet on the side with some liquid mask where it's bumpy, and where we have the surface, it's super smooth. This was a fairly successful practice session. Fairly happy. The airbrush at its ultimate performance. It feels as good as new, and I'm very happy with the feeling and settings in my hand. In the way of the practice run, I'm super happy. I was disjointed at first where I was getting this super crappy splattering, but once I allowed the tank to build up with air and got my flow back, these lines are probably the best I've had in a very long time by taking my time at slowing down and even practicing some different lines. Not straight. It'd be nice if it was. That's a practice and technique thing in itself. That's what mask and rules and whatnot are for. But the fact that there's no overspray and edging, it proves that this is just as good as any other airbrush. The big fat line pulled far away does have overspray, but then you can have many passes with a tight line with something smaller. So if you're thinking camouflage, freehand, effects like that, taking your time and practicing, these lines are very, very possible, and it's not difficult at all. This is just me stuffing around for about 10 minutes, and realistically you got to find at least half an hour to do this once a month, and it's definitely shame on me for not doing it. I think I'll schedule to do so more. I won't be able to make as many homing your airbrush videos, but I could probably do 2 or 3 of these line session documentations in my video for sure. I used to add a disclaimer to my videos at the start that this isn't an infinite tutorial. This isn't the how you must do it or the perfect way of airbrushing, and realistically there is no perfect way of airbrushing. Once you get confident, you find what's easy, what's fun to do, and you just go further in that method and way. Your favorite products, your favorite tools, your favorite thinners, your favorite processes, how thoroughly you clean it, or how sloppy and lazy you decide to get. And not having a regime, you will sometimes lean more so on the sloppy side, especially if you're using a cheaper airbrush and there's no mental need for that much care, even though you should do so more so for the sake of your work than actually the sake of the airbrush. But what is definitely assured is practice is going to improve you in this task. A good source of materials, paints, and constant application onto your projects. If you wish to watch more of my stuff besides the reviews of which airbrushes I've experimented with and tried out, the best way to watch the Homing Your Airbrush Skills series, even if you're new to the channel, is watch it backwards from the latest video down to the earliest video, as it's very experimental in nature. I try different things. I repeat a regime for a while to see if it works in the long run and find out if something works or doesn't work. And you'll find that out by watching it backwards to some of the stuff I wasn't doing too well, like ultrasonic cleaning monthly, where the O-rings are wearing out and needing to buy a new airbrush once every year, 2 years, which was only around $30, to using something with a much larger nozzle diameter, only costs $1, and having far superior improvement. And even with the widest nozzle, you can get some very, very fine lines. For the super detail, you just plug in a different airbrush or a nozzle and do that 1 or 2 little bit of detailing, tickling, or line art. I've waffled on and ranted for way too long. I hope this video gives you some ideas. I definitely hope it inspires you. Get off the internet and try some spraying. Thank you very much for watching. As always, until next time, stay tuned for further content, and we'll catch you guys next time. Stay tuned.